Exposed, how an incredible mafia boss took responsibility for a girl denied cancer treatment. Tony, the Heart, Mancini stood beneath the flickering neon sign of an old diner, rain drenching the grimy streets of Newark as he lit a cigar. The smoke curled like the threads of deceit wrapping around his life. A message had come through, something jarring amidst the usual threats. His daughter, Lily, was sick. A sick child. It wasn't just any sickness, it was cancer. A word that echoed like a death sentence. Outside, tires screeched, the rhythm of chaos that enveloped his empire. Inside, Tony felt a tremor of vulnerability flood him. 45 and feared, Tony had ruled this block with iron fists, his reputation carved from the bones of betrayals and blood debts. Yet, the thought of his daughter connected to this fate twisted his insides. The brutality he demanded from others was a facade meant to shield him from weakness, a weakness he now faced head-on. He was the man who abandoned her for the life of crime, a life that had taught him everything but how to be a father. Would earning forgiveness from that innocent girl be more painful than anything else he had endured? He rushed to the hospital, but the fluorescent lights stung his eyes. Nurses hurried past, their faces a blur. In this sterile altar of hope and despair, the air felt heavier. Tony's pulse quickened as he approached the meeting room. The sight of Lily lying frail and thin tore through Tony like a knife, even as the anger within him flared. A father's heart broke not only for his child but for the system that failed her. The very system he manipulated countless times. Suddenly, power felt paradoxical. Nothing mattered if he couldn't save her. His mind raced. How to get the money for her treatment? The thought of shaking down local businesses felt too monstrous. I could help, I could fix this, but those words collided into a wall of shame. He knew he'd built this empire on suffering. This was a different kind of fight. A father's vow versus a mobster's code. In that moment of silence, he resolved, I'll expose the rot in the system. Before he could step back, he felt a sharp turn of realization. What if this gets her killed? His world of crime blurred against the innocent prognosis of a girl wanting to save lives. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Tony dug deeper, connecting with families in the shadows who'd also been denied care. He listened to their stories, the mothers and fathers who felt crushed by medical bills, the children without treatment. The desperation echoed louder than gunfire on these streets. He feared a storm brewing, not of bullets but of revelation. As anger surged, he realized the streets he walked filled with pain held the answers. Yet even as he strategized, doubts crept in. Where would this lead him? He could see betrayal lurking in familiar faces, gangsters who'd taken loyalty as law. Would they follow him into this moral quagmire, this fight for real justice? The shadows of his past clawed at the edges of his resolve. Tony loomed on a cliff, the choice before him spiraling into the unknown. In one swift move, his empire stood to unravel, and Lily's life hung in precarious balance. Would he confront the world he'd helped build, risking everything, or retreat into the darkness that had once felt like home? From the depths of urgency, the uncertainty twisted tighter around his chest, another betrayal just a heartbeat away, as the chapter screamed to be continued. In the days that followed, a disquiet settled over Tony. Each sunrise felt like an ultimatum, urging him silently to act while drowning in the weight of his choices. With every passing hour, he found himself spiraling deeper into a maze of moral uncertainty. The tension of decision weighed heavily. He knew he had to gather resources and support to challenge a system built on corruption and greed. In a twisted way, this was his new empire, a paternal instinct tangled with the resurgence of a conscience he thought long buried. He reached out to his network with fragile hope, but found himself met with skepticism. Tony had built his reputation on fear, not trust, and he knew that one misstep could fracture the fragile alliances he now needed. He summoned his old crew, men who revered him not for compassion but for power, the loyalty that might echo hollow in a fight for justice. "We need to shift," he declared, laying out the potential for a movement that, quite frankly, could crush the old gang politics in favor of something remarkable. "We fight for something real, or we don't fight at all." But the silence that followed his proclamation struck the most troubling chord. Their glances flickered not with the sparks of inspiration, but the smoldering embers of skepticism. The loyalty they had shared in the past appeared to be tethered solely to blood and money. He began to regret the honesty washing over him, showing vulnerability felt as dangerous as showing weakness. The first mole of doubt seeped into the minds of those who surrounded him. Tyrese, one of his most trusted men, shifted uneasily. "Boss, you're talking about fighting the system. You've done the same on your side. What makes it different now?" "Because now it's my daughter," Tony asserted, his tone sharp, piercing the heavy atmosphere. But as his words reverberated back, he sensed more than hesitation, he sensed fracture. The men who rallied behind him saw physically in his eyes, which now flickered with a new intensity. This fight extended beyond the streets of Newark. It reached the precarious bridge of fatherhood and redemption. Motivated by his fierce love for Lily, Tony faced his inner turmoil head-on. It was not enough to merely change others, he must first reinvent himself. In secret, he sought out hospitals, medical advocates, and engaged with families, real, living testimonies of struggle against injustice. For every day spent in the shadows, he uncovered new layers of bureaucracy, greed, and negligence, all simmering beneath the surface of the healthcare system. One particular afternoon, while sitting with a mother whose child had been denied care, he saw the reflections of his own anguish mirrored in her eyes. As she recounted stories of paperwork lost, phone calls ignored, something within Tony cried out for action. He realized it wasn't just about the fight to save Lily, it was about the fight against a system that had caused endless suffering. Yet the deeper he delved into this new mission, the more he felt the specter of his past loom larger. Old foes began to circle, sensing weakness, eager to exploit an opening. Whispers of betrayal reached him like a bitter wind, gangsters were sniffing the air, and their sense of loyalty was flaring with suspicion and contempt. Was this newfound purpose worth the security of his empire? The dust of his legacy lay unsettled, threatening to avalanche under the weight of his endeavors. In a moment of clarity, as he locked gazes with the framed photo of a smiling Lily on his desk, decision took root. He would confront his former associates. The time had come to face his legacy and sacrifice the hold he had over them, perhaps shattering the old structure to build something new and just. He dialed not to intimidate, but to invite them to a meeting, a summit where he would lay bare his vision and vulnerability. Would they hear him, or would they see him as merely an outcast? The implications hung heavy as he pressed the call button, holding his breath like a man stepping off a cliff. Each ring echoed the question that clawed at his insides: could he trust them not to betray him? As the phone continued to ring, Tony felt suspended in a liminal space, one foot in the past and the other stepping towards an uncertain future. He recalled the stories he had heard just days prior, the narratives of families crushed under the heavy weight of indifference that the system had forced upon them. Each denied treatment, each lost document had coiled around his conscience, squeezing tighter with every unsettling thought of what lay ahead. What if they refused his invitation? What if no one showed? The thought stabbed at his composure. Yet the mere act of dialing that number was a pivotal moment, a catalyst in his evolution from ruler of the streets to potential force for change. His experience with the families ignited a fire within him that he couldn't extinguish, a desire that outmatched the power he once wielded through fear. The phone clicked, a voice broke through his anxious thoughts. "Tony. What is going on?" "Marcus, I need you to gather the crew. I have something important to tell them," Tony said, his voice low but firm, resonating with an urgency he rarely allowed himself to express. "What is this about? You ain't gonna prick our hearts, are you?" Marcus laughed, but the amusement in his tone did nothing to ease Tony's nerves. No jokes. Just come. He hung up, the weight of his decision settling in his gut. The unmistakable fear of vulnerability lingered. Inviting his old crew to discuss a shared mission against corruption was like throwing himself into the jaws of a tiger. Yet, he understood that confronting the past was essential for reinventing his future. The meeting was set for the following evening in an abandoned warehouse, a husk of memories filled with camaraderie and conflict. As dusk approached, he stood before the mirror, searching for the familiar reflection that had now become a stranger. Yet the man looking back at him was not draped in shadows, he bore the light of newfound conviction. The pathology of his past contrasted sharply with the risks he was about to take. Upon arrival, the air thickened with apprehension. Old faces emerged from the shadows, their expressions varied, some curious, others hardened by skepticism. He noticed their eyes, once filled with admiration for his command, now reflected a cautious wariness. "Why are we here, Tony?" Tyree spoke first, arms crossed, his posture a blockade against any sign of weakness. "I'm here to talk about a new way," Tony began, his voice steady. "We've fought for territory, power, and money, but we've overlooked something vital. People are suffering. I'm tired of our empire built on fear. We need to redirect our influence to challenge the system that's robbing families of their dignity." His words hung in the air, an invisible thread connecting past loyalties with present responsibilities. A ripple of unease spread among them, but he pressed on, determined to unveil the truth. "I'm doing this for my daughter, yes," he confessed, his heart pounding against his chest. "But I'm also doing this because we've become part of a cycle that prevents change. Imagine taking power and reshaping it for good instead of destruction." A murmur of discontent began to stir within the group. Marcus leaned in, brow furrowed. "You think we're gonna gamble our necks on some noble cause? What's in it for us?" Clarity struck Tony like a lightning bolt. This was not merely about changing the hearts of men, it was about navigating the choppy waters of old loyalties and self-interest. "We're not gambling. We're investing. There's a future where we can wield influence that empowers rather than diminishes lives, creating a legacy we'll be proud of." As he spoke, something deep within him stirred, an ember of leadership that had once been dormant ignited into a blazing flame of purpose and conviction. They may not be all in yet, perhaps they needed to see him fight for authenticity. The conversation evolved, tangible tension mingling with curiosity as he articulated broader visions, community initiatives, lobbying for healthcare reform, and supporting families afflicted by systemic injustice. He could see the doubt slowly shifting to intrigue, but their commitment still hung in the balance. Yet as phase one of his rekindled empire began to take shape, he felt shadows lurking just beyond the periphery. Old adversaries were circling once again, drawn to the vulnerability of uncertainty. What if they saw this as an opportunity to strike? As the weight of that thought pressed down on him, he stood resolute, knowing the next steps would not only require external confrontation but a reckoning with the very fabric of his being. The air grew heavier with possibilities and challenges, the slideshow of perilous paths unfolding in his mind. Would he unite his old crew for a common cause, or would he find himself isolated, facing the wrath of those who would rather maintain status quo than fight for change? The stakes had never been higher, forcing him into an existential crossroads. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight wash over him, cognizant that this was just the beginning. Would he pivot the narrative of his life into a redemptive chapter or succumb to the gravity of his past, lurking ever closer? Tony couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were closing in. Each old friend turned potential ally bore the weight of hesitance, it was evident they stood at a crossroads with him. Yet the gravity of the situation weighed even heavier on his shoulders, pushing him to consider not just the chaos of their past, but the fragility of their potential future. The next day, he met with his contacts in the community, individuals who had already begun to act against corruption. In gritty storefronts and makeshift cafes, he listened to their tales of heartache and hardship. The stories piled onto his heart, each a paradox of loss yet coupled with unwavering hope for change. He felt every mother's anguish over her child's suffering, and each denial of care tugged at something deep within him. In those conversations, he found pieces of himself he hadn't acknowledged: the drive to protect, to uplift, and most importantly, to advocate. Tony had always been a man of action, yet now he understood that this action could take different forms. He was learning that leadership wasn't just about command, it was about listening and understanding the stakes. That evening, he gathered the crew in the warehouse once more. The atmosphere vibrated with uncertainty, yet he felt a distinct clarity about what he needed to convey. We're not going back to the streets, and we're not here to throw punches. We're pivoting. We're here to build something that counts. The crew exchanged glances, their skepticism palpable. Tony inhaled deeply, determined to bridge the gap between his old life and the new path he sought. Each one of you knows families who have lost a parent to senseless violence or a child due to a lack of healthcare. This doesn't just touch us, it defines us. We can turn this pain into power. We can fight not just with fists but with influence. Teresa's expression softened momentarily, but mistrust still lingered. So what do we do when the system fights back? They won't just stand by and let us take their power. Tony responded with fervor. Then we meet that fight head-on. We leverage everything we've built and everything we know. Think about it: the connections in our community, the respect we've earned through fear, we can transform that into something meaningful. As he spoke, Tony's heart raced. He was digging deep within himself, unearthing latent capabilities and ideas that had laid dormant under the weight of his past. Just as he had once wielded fear effectively, he realized he could now wield hope and determination with equal force. It wasn't lost on him that he was asking them to trust him at a vulnerable moment, and that was a risk he had to embrace. A flicker of interest surfaced as their faces turned towards him, but doubt wasn't far behind. Marcus raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched on his face. You think those rich folks in suits will let us in? We're just a bunch of old gangsters trying to play in a league that doesn't want us. If they don't see us as a threat, we're irrelevant, Tony replied, but if we choose to take action, they will notice. We can shift the narrative from being merely notorious figures to becoming advocates for families who desperately need assistance. Silence hung heavily in the air, yet Tony felt a tremor of possibility. He needed them to rally around this vision, to understand his commitment was unwavering. He was no longer just fighting for himself or his daughter, he was fighting for a community's dignity, for lives that had been overlooked, and perhaps, in some alchemical way, for redemption. In the following days, he began forging alliances. He leveraged his old connections to gather resources, reaching out to those who could amplify their cause. Each step forward was fraught with tension, yet he noticed how others responded to his intention. In moments of direct confrontation, he knew he would now have to face not only the resistance from those in power but the growing dissent from elements within his own ranks who didn't share his vision. The pressure mounted. Would they unite under a cause much larger than themselves, or would old instincts take charge, leaving him to navigate this moral labyrinth alone? As he confronted the duality of his existence, his nurturing aspirations tangled with the raw instincts of his past, and emerging clarity compelled him towards the next phase. He could pivot, but at what cost? Would he risk his safety and reputation to foster a legacy of change? The battle for their collective future was just beginning, and as whispers of opposition began to circulate, Tony realized he stood on the threshold of an intricate confrontation. The moment of reckoning approached. Would he emerge transformed or be swallowed by the tidal forces of his own making? Standing at the edge of a new chapter, Tony felt the weight of expectation settle on his shoulders. The optimistic vision he had painted for himself and his crew was beginning to flicker like a candle in the wind. As he paced in the quiet of his apartment, glancing at the immense cityscape beyond the window, a profound realization sank in. The stakes were higher than merely altering their path. He was plunged into a moral wrestling match against his own nature. It was time to confront not only the resistance from outside but the darker echoes of his past that whispered unsettling doubts. What if the old Tony, quick to bow to anger and violence, was the undeniable core of his identity? Could he sustainably reshape not just his crew but himself? Days blurred as he immersed himself in talks with community leaders and healthcare advocates. He sought knowledge, attending meetings that stretched late into the evening. A new horizon emerged: legislation, city council meetings, state funding discussions. These were the battles that would define future victories or failures. Yet with each conversation, Tony's resolve intensified. He was piecing together an unfamiliar world that demanded strategy and intellect, not mere bravado. However, the gnawing unease about his crew weighed heavily on him. They were unpredictable, rooted in a legacy steeped in fear and rebellion that had always been a part of their strength. How could he indict their past while expecting their embrace for a new purpose? In these challenging moments, he recognized his growth. He could no longer act as a domineering figure. He needed their insights, their experiences, as intricately woven as his own. He called another meeting, mind racing as he balanced his ambition with their skepticism. "I know what we've been, but let us be real about what we can be. If we want to take this fight forward, we need to transform our battle language." Tyrese interrupted, his brows knitted together. "You're pushing for us to toss aside everything we know." "For what? So people in suits take us seriously?" "No," Tony replied, grateful for Tyrese's candidness. "I'm asking for us to command respect not through fear, but by showing we're more than our past. We can use our experiences for something greater. We've seen the darkness, and we can shine a light on it." A heavy silence filled the room again, but this time it felt electrifying. Tony searched their expressions, feeling the tension shift slightly. Each man carried a legacy full of burdens and hopes, a tapestry of their shared history. He could see their potential entwined in conviction glimmers. "I'm willing to risk everything for that," he continued, allowing a rare vulnerability seep into his voice. "I want us to fight not only against a corrupt system but for those trapped within it. I want to elevate our status from unwanted examples to powerful advocates." As he spoke, he could see the first flickers of attendance in their eyes, and with that, an idea formed. If they could confront the trauma sewn into their very identity, they could harness it as momentum for change. In those moments, he felt himself stretched between the familiar call for action and the necessity for patience. He had to mindfully lead them through their tumultuous emotions, guiding them to a threshold of growth. So he began to outline a plan. "Let us get into the community," he urged, stepping closer to the men, the core of his resolve charged with passion. "Let us hear their stories, really listen. We'll build our voice from that." But even as he issued his plan, another thought prickled at him. Would they actually commit, or would they allow fear to hold them hostage? He recognized that to push forward meant risking everything: his relationships, his safety, perhaps even his very sense of identity. The burden of this leap weighed heavily on him, but Tony knew that each step taken was also a step toward liberation. As he rounded out his speech, a disquieting realization crept forward: old habits die hard. He needed a strategy not just for engagement but for fostering trust. Amidst doubt, as murmurs of apprehension began to swirl, the fear of rejection permeated the air. "Remember, this journey starts with us just being open to what we can become," he ended resolutely, but the question loomed. Could he transcend the shackles of his past before they caught him again? Tony felt the tension tighten around him like a vice, knowing the comfort of the familiar was a deceptive foe lying in wait. He was about to embark on a transformative endeavor, yet there was an unsettling dread about the confrontation with his own dark legacy that lingered like a shadow beyond the light. The thought rattled through his mind: what could happen if he stumbled? As the crew processed his words, Tony experienced a surge of commitment battling with doubt. Would he find the strength to challenge not only the system but his own identity? The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and he stood poised on the brink of a pivotal moment. This was more than just a fight, it was a fundamental choice between the man he had been and the man he wished to become. The tension coiled tighter. What would happen when he truly faced the most formidable opponent of all, himself? The following days unfolded like a storm, each moment an unrelenting test of Tony's resolve. He found himself stuck in a whirlwind of community meetings and strategy sessions, his mind often drifting back to his crew's skeptical faces. Doubt swirled, buoyed by the fear that he might not have what it took to lead them into this unfamiliar territory. As he mapped out plans, he became painfully aware of the chasm between their history and the future he envisioned. How could he bridge that gap? With every step they took into the community, he saw their passion, but he also caught glimpses of their resistance. Teresa's voice echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the hurdles ahead. They were haunted by their past, and Tony was no stranger to that darkness himself. One day, he received an unexpected call. A local activist named Marissa wanted to meet. She was known for her work in healthcare reform and her unwavering commitment to helping marginalized communities. The moment he heard her talk about systemic issues, a flicker of hope ignited within him. Maybe her wisdom could illuminate a path. Sitting across from her in a modest coffee shop, he leaned in as she spoke about her own struggles, her fire punctuated by determination. You can't lead a movement by only wanting change, you have to embody it in every fiber of your being, Tony. Your crew will follow your spirit, your actions. They need to trust you. Her words pierced through the barriers of his uncertainty, but they also ignited a sense of urgency. He needed to cultivate that trust within his crew before anyone else would believe in their mission. As he left the cafe, he considered how he could invite Marissa to speak to his team. Her story could resonate, providing a living example of resilience and commitment. Upon his return, he gathered the crew again, feeling the weight of expectation thrumming in the air. I've been thinking, he began, voice steady yet vulnerable. What if we host a meeting to hear from someone who has been fighting for change? I've got a connection with an activist who knows this battle well. Together, we can redefine what it means to advocate for ourselves and each other. A murmur of intrigue rippled among them, but skepticism still lingered. As he looked around the table, he saw shadows of defiance mixed with flickers of curiosity. Fight for what you believe in, right? It's a part of our DNA, isn't it? He pressed, anxiety flaring in the pit of his stomach. But this isn't just about fighting, it's about transforming how we do it. Teresa's brows furrowed deeper. And if she doesn't connect with us? What if she is just another voice telling us what we should do? Tony hesitated, contemplating the impact of that question. He needed to show his crew that vulnerability could be a strength. That's a valid concern. But remember the encounters we've had? People connecting through shared stories will allow us to sift through confusion and fear. Maybe, just maybe, it'll ignite something in each of us. Gradually, doubt gave way to a sense of possibility. Tony could feel the hesitant energy in the room shift. This was a small victory, a crack in their collective resistance, and it rejuvenated him. Perhaps he could help them embrace this new way, to confront fear not with aggression, but with empathy and understanding. Still, a persistent shadow tugged at him as he lay down to sleep that night. Could he trust this new path, or was he merely embellishing the chasm instead of bridging it? His own reflections served as a reminder that even small changes could yield monumental shifts. The next morning, the tension was palpable as he prepared for Marissa's visit. He moved through the motions, shuffling papers, but his mind was a tempest of worry. Would they be receptive? What if the old Tony rooted in quick judgments and aggression threatened to rear its ugly head when the real conversation began? In those unsettling moments before her arrival, Tony faced his reflection in the mirror, seeking an anchor. He needed to embody the change he wanted to see, embracing patience and clarity. This was not just a moment for him, it was a chance to lead his crew into uncharted territory and possibly confront the most intimidating adversary of all, the doubts lurking within them. He took a deep breath, grounded himself in the present, and as he turned to the crew, he felt a fire kindling within. If he wanted to shift the narrative, it would require confronting his past head-on and allowing them to witness not just a leader, but a man committed to his own evolution. With a determined resolve, he headed toward the door to wait for Marissa. His heart pounded with anticipation and fear, the weight of expectations forming a heavy fog around him. Could today be the day they began to dismantle their fears? Everything hinged on this moment, and he sensed that the real journey was about to begin. Would he find the courage to confront the shadows, or would the past pull him back into its depths? The cafe door swung open, and a wave of energy enveloped Tony as Marissa stepped in. The quiet conversations faded into the background, leaving only the undercurrent of his anxious heartbeat. He gestured for her to join him at the table, where his crew was still settling into their chairs, exchanging hesitant glances. "Thank you for coming," Tony said, his voice steadier than he felt. Marissa flashed a warm yet determined smile, instantly breaking the ice that had settled over the room. As she took a seat, he engaged in small talk to ease the tension, but he was all too aware of the hesitant expressions that mirrored his own internal struggle. "Let us get started," Marissa said, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Change doesn't come easy. It often requires a willingness to dive into uncomfortable truths." With that, she wove stories of battles fought in the face of indifference. Her tone painted vivid images of systemic injustices, offering perspectives his crew hadn't considered. Tony watched as she stirred something within the group, a spark of recognition in their eyes. Curiosity danced with skepticism, and he sensed the shift in energy. It was no longer just about listening, they were beginning to engage in her narrative, grappling with their own experiences in tandem. "I know you've endured hardship," Marissa continued, focusing on the crew. "But every one of you has a story worth sharing. Your past is not a weight, it's a catalyst for change." Her words struck a chord within Tony. Could he truly encourage them to see their struggles as strengths? The discussion took root, and Tony facilitated, guided by Marissa's lead. In this moment, he steered the conversation toward vulnerability. What if we fought less against everyone else and more against what holds us back from sharing our truth? He could feel the edges of their former skepticism begin to soften, allowing for a more profound exploration of their fears. Tyrese, ever the skeptic, finally interjected. "It's easy to talk about fighting for change, but how do we actually do it? How do we trust again?" The silence that followed was palpable, sounding like an echo of Tony's own quest for confidence. This was a moment that could bridge the gap between theory and action. "Trust starts with honesty," Marissa replied, her gaze unwavering. "The foundation of any movement, personal or collective, is built on authentic connections." Tony leaned back, absorbing her insight. He realized she was hitting the target directly in the heart of his internal conflicts. He had made decisions rooted in past frustrations, but were those decisions aligning with the growth he desired? As the discussion progressed, resolved faces began to emerge from the shadows of doubt. Stories flowed. A tale of stepping away from violence, the struggle of navigating disappointment. Tony encouraged them to speak. Each confession resonated, echoing across the barriers they had built around themselves. In that moment, he witnessed transformations unfold before him. Vulnerability was taking its shape, and with it, the energy in the room shifted palpably. He felt more than just a leader. In this shared experience, he was becoming a part of something much larger than his individual efforts. This was not merely a session with an activist, it evolved into a microcosm of their potential. Yet, as the meeting drew to a close, a stirring fear crept back under his skin. He had drawn from deep wells of faith and strength, yet doubt still lingered. What if this glimpse of progress was fleeting? What new challenges might emerge from such openness? As they thanked Marissa and she exited, leaving behind a stirred crew filled with tentative optimism, he caught sight of the reflection of his own turmoil in their eyes. Had they begun to trust him, or was this merely a moment of clarity, destined to evaporate? As they left the cafe, Tony's resolve tightened. This meeting had sparked something essential, but a looming question hung in the air: could he ensure this momentum would not only continue but grow stronger in the days to come? Determined to find out, he gathered the crew for a follow-up meeting, needing to hear their thoughts while confronting his own daunting fears. The clock was ticking, and he could feel the inevitable approach of tomorrow, the next step in their journey. But what if tomorrow revealed more than just their collective uncertainties? What if he was about to discover the extent of his own untapped potential? The evening air was thick with an uneasy anticipation as Tony prepared for the follow-up meeting. The sleek conference room felt foreign, its polished furniture contrasting sharply with the emotional turbulence coursing through him. He paced the space, drawing deep breaths, attempting to center himself before his crew arrived. Each step felt like a step deeper into uncharted territory, a realm where vulnerability met leadership. As the familiar faces trickled in, a mix of uncertainty and determination settled over the room. Tony noticed their hushed conversations, fragmented snippets of discussion that hinted at the topics swirling in their minds. He cleared his throat, signaling for attention, and tried to mask the apprehension lurking beneath his confident facade. "Thanks for being here, everyone. I know last time was intense, but we have to keep this momentum going," he began, striving for the steady tone Marissa had adopted. The weight of his words felt heavier than he anticipated, like an anchor cast into the depths of their collective vulnerabilities. He sensed the wavering trust from their eyes, they were unsure whether this was merely another exercise in futility. Determination sparked within him. This was not the time for polite droning, they needed something real, something palpable. "Let us reflect on last week. What did we feel? What did we learn?" He prompted, watching carefully as expressions morphed from confusion to recognition. Liana, a whisper of a girl with fierce resolve, stood, her courage igniting a spark in others. "I realized I've been holding back on sharing my story. I always thought nobody would care," she confessed, glancing around the room for affirmation. Encouraged, Tony chimed in, "That's exactly it. Your story is a part of the larger narrative, something that can resonate with others." As discussions ignited, Tony felt each story peel back layers of mistrust, revealing heartaches and triumphs alike. He engaged them, asking questions that guided reflections deeper. They began to connect their past experiences with the notion of taking responsibility not only for their lives but also for each other. But a familiar fear clawed at him: could he handle guiding them through this journey? What if he led them deeper into the murky waters of confrontational honesty only to have them surface gasping for despair instead of empowerment? As the room grew warmer with shared stories, Tony turned inward, grappling with the realization that he, too, had not yet walked the path of accountability. He confessed his fears of failure, how the weight of leadership often felt like a noose tightening around his throat. "I don't always know what I'm doing. I'm figuring it out as we go along, just like all of you," he admitted, the vulnerability sending ripples of surprise across the crew. Moments later, Tyrese, still skeptical but visibly moved, broke his silence. "So you're telling us you're not perfect either? That makes it a bit easier to trust you." As he spoke, Tony felt a release. The shared acknowledgement of imperfection fostered a bond that quickly ebbed the remaining doubts within the room. With the discussion veering into a constructive realm, the air was now charged with potential. Each member seemed to tap into newfound courage. They shared not just their pasts, but the courage they craved to face future challenges. The hours slipped by, and Tony wrestled with the growing realization that this group might just be on the precipice of transformative growth. He felt a flicker of hope that perhaps being a leader wasn't solely about showing strength, but embracing the struggle along with those who followed. Yet as the meeting drew to a close, one chilling question lingered in his mind: what awaited them if they continued this path of honesty? What shadows might they unearth, and would they be prepared for the truths that may surface, both personal and collective? Determined to explore these depths without recoiling, he steeled himself for what was to come. Tomorrow's discussions would delve even deeper into the very fabric of their identities, igniting further transforming truths. But just as he felt a rush of excitement for the journey ahead, a lingering doubt slipped in. Would they be able to return to the surface after exposing the darkest corners of their personal tragedies? As they filed out, Tony remained behind, wrestling with the weight of the responsibilities he had ignited within them, while an undeniable urging loomed: what truths might challenge their resolve next? Dawn's light crept through the blinds, casting stripes across Tony's desk, a reminder of the ticking clock and the day ahead. He found himself staring at the blank meeting agenda, a canvas of uncertainty that loomed like an unmade bed. The reflections from the polished wood reminded him of last night's revelations, the raw emotions that unfurled like petals in a hidden garden. They had merely scratched the surface, but beneath lay a tangle of roots that needed untangling. As he prepared for the next gathering, Tony felt a shift within himself. The need to model vulnerability was crucial, yet the weight of their expectations pressed heavily on his shoulders. He questioned his readiness to dive deeper into the emotions that could very well threaten the fragile progress they'd made. What if someone didn't handle the truths well? What if the revelations forced them to confront aspects of themselves they weren't prepared to face? But then again, wasn't he that the point? Real growth could only emerge from discomfort. The stakes were high, and he couldn't shy away from facing them head-on. After a quick breakfast, he reviewed his notes from the previous session. Tony noted the way Liana, Tyrese, and the others had responded to vulnerability. It had created a ripple effect. Each testimony had served as a stepping stone towards excavating shared courage. To build on that foundation, he needed to challenge them to delve deeper into their narratives while ensuring they felt safe enough to do so. As he arrived at the conference room, Tony noted the murmurs of apprehension among the team. He inhaled deeply, releasing the pent-up anxiety, and made his way to the head of the table. "Morning, everyone. Let us start with what's been on your mind. What connections have you made since we last met?" The group exchanged glances, the unspoken apprehension still evident. But he persisted, urging each to share their thoughts, gradually untangling the tightness in the room. Liana was the first to speak, recounting how her initial hesitation had morphed into motivation. "I'm learning that by giving my stories weight, I also share their power," she said, her voice steady. Tony felt a surge of pride. Her courage highlighted an undeniable truth: vulnerability, once seen as a weakness, could be redefined as a strength. He prompted others to share their revelations, hoping for more personal narratives, deeper stories. Each revelation forged a stronger connection among them, but he felt another layer buried beneath the surface, a fear of failure that had yet to be voiced. The atmosphere shifted when Tyrese reluctantly expressed his worries about abandonment. "What if we delve so deep that we lose ourselves?" "I've seen that happen before," he cautioned, his voice tinged with genuine concern. The vulnerability in Tyrese's words turned the tide of the meeting. Tony seized the moment, a chance to confront that fear collectively, to explore the uncharted territories of loss, guilt, and what it meant to lean into discomfort. "What we're doing here is an act of trust. It's messy, it's tough, and yes, it can feel like we're walking a tightrope above storms. But together, we can help anchor one another." As the day progressed, they shared stories that occasionally punctured the walls around their hearts. Moments of laughter blended with tears, and in those hours, they wove a tapestry of experiences that felt electric, raw, and vulnerable. Still, the question loomed: was he capable of guiding them through the labyrinthine depths of their truths? Would self-exploration reinforce their bond, or expose fractures in their foundations? Tony realized he had to lead by example, taking risks with his own narrative. In the quiet aftermath of the meeting, as he stood alone in the room, Tony faced another personal dilemma. What chains of his own he would be willing to unshackle today? He felt an urgency to delve into his past decisions, breathing life into wounds he had kept hidden. As he gathered his papers, an unshakable intuition stirred within him, a nudge that told him this journey of leadership was as much about his own reckoning as it was about confronting the crew's challenges. The path of honesty appeared treacherous, but the potential for transformation beckoned irresistibly. Just as he turned to leave, a question rattled him to his core: how deep could he dive into his own shadows, and what truths would he have to confront should he expose his past? In the weeks that followed, Tony the Heart Mancini found himself entrenched in a battle far greater than any he had waged on the streets of Newark. He was engaged in a struggle not merely for his daughter's life, but for the lives of countless families who had battled against a system bent against them. This was a fight rooted in accountability, trust, and the courage to let go of past lawyership for something profoundly nourishing instead. The transformation within Tony became palpable. He was no longer the intimidating figure cloaked in the shadows of crime, but rather a beacon flickering with resolve. He had carefully facilitated meetings with families, cancer advocates, and healthcare reform leaders. Each interaction was a step further toward dismantling the stigma that had once defined him. Each story shared revealed the depths of human suffering. They became threads woven tightly together, forming a tapestry of resilience that he could now belong to. Building alliances wasn't without hurdles. Many local influencers had once looked upon Tony's past as insurmountable evidence that he couldn't be trusted. Others remained skeptical of his sincerity. Yet, as he dedicated countless hours to listening, offering support, and working toward change, he proved not only to them but to himself that he could redefine his legacy. The defining moment crystallized during a city council hearing, where he stood shoulder to shoulder with families devastated by the healthcare system. Stripped of bravado yet imbued with purpose, he spoke passionately. These families deserve care that is no longer denied to them. As a community, we cannot afford to let power dictate who receives help. I am here today not merely for my daughter Lily, but for every innocent child who has been overlooked in a system that should champion health over greed. A mixture of rumbles and murmurs filled the room, disbelief mingled with curiosity. Perhaps, for the first time, they were witnessing a powerful shift. When the applause erupted, it resonated with more than just affirmation, it was recognition, the dawning of transformation, a glimpse into a brighter future that he had only dared to imagine. As the weeks progressed, Tony began collaborating with Marissa, the activist whose words had catalyzed his evolution. Together, they forged initiatives focused on healthcare accessibility, a series of workshops and rallies that empowered the marginalized voices of Newark. He further organized support groups to gather families affected by denial of care, creating a platform where they could share experiences, network, and gain strategies to advocate effectively for their rights. Old gangsters turned advocates began to turn out for these gatherings, compelled by Tony's conviction. Their hardened facade softened as they witnessed firsthand the impact a unified voice could catalyze in local policy. For every new story shared, each individual became a pillar of support for others, and Tony felt the expansive weight of community forming around him, a community he had once shattered. One day, as he walked through the vibrant streets of Newark, the atmosphere crackled with the energy of hope. This wasn't the Tony who had cast shadows but a man transformed, one who had confronted not only his past but emerged stronger from the battle. Conversations with families, newfound alliances, and community support had created a lifeline that felt irrevocably connected. As he paused to take in the moment, he felt an overwhelming surge of pride, a sense of achievement that evaded him for so long. His final test came when local news covered a story about their successful push for healthcare reform, a long overdue guarantee for those who had been marginalized. Tony was recognized as a beacon of hope for many in the community. He stood before the camera, humbled yet fierce. Change is only as strong as our commitment to one another. Today is proof that we can conquer any system, refrain from being defined by our pasts, and get a chance to rewrite our futures, he remarked, confidence radiating through him. The transformation wasn't just about change in health policy, it was a testament to the power of vulnerability, authenticity, and the courage to break away from the chains of fear and doubt. As he glanced at a beaming Lily, who had begun her journey of recovery, he knew he was not just Tony, the heart, Mancini, the feared Mafia boss. He was Tony Mancini, an advocate, a father, a man who had risen from the depths of his darkness and cultivated a future filled with genuine promise. He had learned that true leadership involved not only confrontation of the past but a continuous commitment to evolving. As he embraced the warmth of Lily's laughter, he recognized the profound truth that his legacy would no longer be defined by fear, but through love, responsibility, and meaningful action that inspired others toward redemption and purpose. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm, as it makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about this transformative ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now, because this is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of these actions.